On the ride from the airport to the resort, Jack Miller felt the atmosphere inside the car heavier than usual, even though the soft notes of jazz were playing lightly from the speakers. Beside him, Claire, his wife, was glued to her phone, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The glow of the screen lit up her face, and Jack couldn't help but notice the faint smile that flickered across her lips as she read a message. Something deep inside him stirred, a feeling he didn't want to acknowledge. Suspicion. "Work?" Jack asked, trying to keep his tone as casual as possible. Claire flinched slightly, startled, before looking up at him. "Yeah, just a few things. I need to update my colleagues," she replied, her half-hearted smile leaving Jack with the distinct sense he'd been brushed off. The car glided along the winding roads leading to the resort, flanked on both sides by swaying palm trees. Jack should have been savoring the moment. This trip had taken him a month to plan, a surprise for Claire, a chance to rekindle their connection after months of silent distance in their home. But Claire's eyes remained locked on her phone, and the unease inside him grew. When they arrived at the resort, they were led to a spacious suite with large windows overlooking the ocean. The warm hues of the sunset painted the waves a brilliant orange. Jack settled into a chair by the window, absently twirling a glass of champagne that the hotel staff had provided. Across the room, Claire was unpacking their luggage, her phone still in her hand. This time, she had her back to Jack, her fingers typing even faster than before. Jack narrowed his eyes, curiosity gnawing at him. "You seem busy," Jack quipped, forcing a playful tone. Claire froze for a split second before turning to face him, a flicker of guilt crossing her features. "Not really, just texting Mom and a few friends," she said, but Jack noticed how quickly she slipped the phone into her purse. That first night, Jack woke to the sound of Claire's phone vibrating. He turned his head to see her lying with her back to him, but her phone screen glowed faintly beside her pillow. Unable to resist, Jack reached for it, but just as his fingers touched the device, Claire stirred, her eyes snapping open. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low but defensive. Jack hesitated, then placed the phone back where it was. "I was just going to silence it so it wouldn't wake you," he said. Claire stared at him for a long moment before grabbing the phone, quickly tapping a few buttons and placing it on the nightstand. "I'll handle it," she said, her tone colder than usual. Jack lay back down, but sleep evaded him. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. An unwelcome thought crept into his mind. Something isn't right. The next morning, Claire claimed she had a headache and refused to join Jack for the breakfast reservation he had carefully arranged at the resort's restaurant. She stayed in the room, leaving Jack to wander the beach alone. He tried to find solace in the rhythmic sound of the waves and the warmth of the sun, but the growing knot in his stomach wouldn't loosen. Sitting on a lounge chair, he pulled out his phone, only to see a text message from Victor, his longtime friend, pop up on the screen. "Jack, do you want to know the truth?" Jack frowned, typing back quickly. "What do you mean?" Less than a minute later, Victor responded, "Claire, you need to check on her. You probably don't want to believe it, but if I'm wrong, that's the best outcome for you." Jack stared at the message, his heartbeat quickening like the crashing waves in front of him. Was he ready to face the truth? Did he have the courage to step into the darkness Victor was hinting at? The questions swirled in his mind, pulling him into a day he already knew would change everything. Jack remained seated on the beach, his phone clutched tightly in his hand, but his mind replayed memories of the past with Claire like an old, worn film reel. The golden sunlight stretched across the sand, the waves lapping gently at the shore, but all he could feel was emptiness. How had they come to this? How could the woman who had once been his entire world now feel so distant? They had met on an autumn afternoon, back when Jack was designing a cozy cafe in the heart of the city. Claire had walked in, her hair tied up in a high ponytail, wearing an emerald green dress that stood out against the warm brick walls of the cafe. She carried a notebook and sat by the window scribbling intently. Jack was drawn to her immediately. It wasn't just her striking appearance, it was her confidence, the energy that seemed to radiate from her as if she carried her own light. Unable to resist, Jack approached her, using the cafe's design as an excuse. "What do you think of this color scheme?" he asked. Claire looked up, her smoky gray eyes meeting his, and Jack felt like she could see straight through him. "It's not bad," she said with a soft smile. "But if you added a touch of gold, it might feel warmer." That was the moment everything began. They quickly became inseparable. Claire was a driven journalist who thrived on chasing hard-hitting stories, while Jack was an up-and-coming interior designer struggling to make a name for himself. Together, they tackled life's challenges, supporting each other through tight budgets and long workdays. Evenings were their sanctuary. Claire would read aloud drafts of her articles and Jack would sketch ideas for his next project. They built their life on dreams and shared ambitions. Marriage had felt like the natural next step. Jack still remembered the night he proposed at the park where they used to run together. Under the soft glow of a street lamp, Claire had cried as he knelt before her, the ring in his hand. "I've always known you were the one for me," she said through her tears. That was the night Jack believed all his dreams had come true. The early years of their marriage were blissful. They built their lives from scratch, with Jack pouring his heart into his designs and Claire's journalism career taking off. They talked about starting a family, about the kind of home they'd create for their future children. Claire had always said she wanted 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and dreamed of taking them on trips around the world. But slowly things began to change. Claire's career skyrocketed, and she was constantly traveling for work. The dinners they once cherished together became rare, and their conversations grew shorter, limited to logistical exchanges. Jack tried to ignore the growing distance, convincing himself that her success was worth the sacrifices. But deep down, he felt something slipping away. Jack's attempts to reignite their connection were met with indifference. He planned romantic evenings and cooked Claire's favorite meals, but she always had an excuse: late meetings, deadlines, exhaustion. The cracks in their relationship widened, but Jack clung to the hope that things would get better. He wanted to believe that the woman he loved was still there, somewhere. Now, sitting on the beach with Victor's message fresh in his mind, Jack couldn't deny the truth any longer. The signs had been there all along. He had just refused to see them. As the waves rolled in and out, Jack made a silent promise to himself. Whatever the truth was, he would face it, even if it broke him. He couldn't resist walking over, using the cafe's color scheme as an excuse to start a conversation. Claire looked up, her misty gray eyes meeting his, and Jack felt as though she could see straight through him. "This green isn't bad, but if you added a touch of gold, it might feel warmer," she said, a soft smile playing on her lips. That was the beginning of everything. They quickly became inseparable. Claire was a fiery journalist, always diving headfirst into the most challenging stories, while Jack was a struggling interior designer trying to carve out his name in the industry. Together, they weathered the tough times, days when money was tight and bills piled high on the kitchen counter. Yet, their evenings were a sanctuary. Claire would read her latest articles aloud while Jack sketched new design ideas, their shared dreams keeping the flame of hope alive. Marriage felt like the most natural step forward. Jack remembered the day he proposed like it was yesterday, at the park where they used to go jogging together. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, Claire cried as he knelt before her, holding the ring. "I've always known you were the one for me," she said, her tears glistening in the light. That was the night Jack believed all his dreams had come true. The early years of their marriage were a beautiful chapter. Together, they built their life from scratch. Jack poured every ounce of passion into his designs, while Claire wrote thought-provoking pieces that found their way into major publications. They often talked about the future, a warm, cozy home filled with the laughter of children. Claire would always say she wanted 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and dreamed of taking them on adventures around the world. But over time, things began to shift. Claire's career skyrocketed as she became a sought-after journalist for major outlets. She was constantly traveling for work, leaving Jack alone in their increasingly empty home. At first, Jack didn't mind. He thought it was just part of the price of success. But as their dinners grew rare and their conversations became little more than updates on schedules, he started to notice the cracks forming in their relationship. Claire no longer seemed like the woman he had fallen in love with. The distance between them didn't come from a single moment but rather grew like a hairline fracture, widening with each passing day. Jack tried everything to salvage their connection. He planned romantic evenings, cooked Claire's favorite meals, and waited up late just to spend a few minutes with her. But she often came home late or dismissed his efforts with excuses about work. "You don't understand," she would say, her voice tinged with frustration. "My job is stressful." And Jack, ever eager to make her happy, chose to remain silent and accept it. One evening, as Jack was tidying Claire's workspace, he stumbled upon a plane ticket. It wasn't for a trip she had ever mentioned. When he asked her about it, Claire waved it off casually. "Oh, just a last-minute event. I forgot to tell you," she said, but something in her tone felt off. Jack didn't press further. Deep down, he feared confronting a truth that could shatter everything. Now, sitting on the beach with his phone in hand, Jack couldn't stop replaying those moments. Every missed sign, every excuse he had ignored, came rushing back to him. He wondered where he had gone wrong. He had always believed their love was unbreakable, but perhaps his blind trust had left him vulnerable and alone. His hand tightened around the phone as he reread Victor's message. The truth was drawing closer, and Jack knew there was no turning back. Returning to the hotel room, Jack found Claire sitting by the window, gazing out at the ocean with a glass of red wine in her hand. Her fingers lightly tapped the rim of the glass in rhythm with the faint music playing in the background. "Where were you for so long?" she asked without turning, her voice light as a breeze but tinged with indifference. Jack shrugged, masking the storm inside him. "Just went for a walk. I needed some air." Claire didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Jack felt the distance between them growing with every unspoken word. Instead of confronting her, he chose to keep his composure. He walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not the same anymore, are we?" he said, his voice low and restrained. Claire flinched but didn't turn to face him. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her tone vague, as though she wanted to avoid the conversation altogether. Claire's coldness felt like a knife twisting in Jack's chest, but he refused to let it consume him. He stepped back, forcing a faint smile. "It's fine. I get it. I'm heading to the bar for a bit," he said, grabbing the room key and walking out. But inside, a fire was beginning to burn. At the bar, Jack sat with a cocktail in hand, though he barely touched it. His mind was racing, piecing together every suspicious moment, every missed red flag. The hushed phone calls Claire made in her office, the unexplained business trips, and now her palpable indifference during a vacation meant to bring them closer. The unease inside Jack was no longer just a feeling. It was a tidal wave crashing through him, pushing him toward an inevitable decision. He needed to uncover the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. When Jack returned to the room, Claire had changed into a sleek red silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her hair falling naturally over her shoulders with a subtle elegance. Jack's heart skipped a beat, not with admiration but with a sinking feeling in his gut. "Going somewhere?" he asked, forcing his voice to sound casual. Claire hesitated for just a moment before smoothing her expression. "Just heading down to the bar. I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice light but rehearsed. "I'll come with you," Jack offered, his gaze fixed on her. Claire gave him a tight-lipped smile, shaking her head. "No need. I'd rather be alone to think." Jack nodded silently, watching as Claire picked up her purse and walked out. The second the door clicked shut behind her, Jack moved to the closet where she often kept her bag. He pulled it open, his movements deliberate but steady, and found her phone tucked inside. His heart was pounding now, but his hands remained steady as he unlocked it. No password. Jack felt an odd mix of relief and dread as the screen lit up. He opened her messages and immediately spotted a familiar name, Ethan. Jack began scrolling through their conversation, each line cutting into him like a blade. Ethan, I can't wait to see you tonight. Wear that red dress. It makes you look absolutely stunning. Claire, be patient. I'll come after Jack's asleep. He doesn't suspect a thing. Ethan, just tell him you need time. I'll give you everything he can't. Jack's breath hitched. His chest tightened as if someone had gripped his heart with an iron fist. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a glaring, undeniable truth, blinding in its clarity. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was plotting, planning to make him into the fool who never saw it coming. Anger flared up inside Jack, hot and consuming, but he didn't let it take over. Instead, he placed the phone back exactly where he found it, closed the bag, and stood there for a moment, his mind racing. Just then the door opened and Claire walked back in. Her hair swayed gently as she moved, her cheeks slightly flushed, either from wine or excitement. I forgot my wallet, she said, brushing past him without a glance. Jack stood frozen, holding his breath as she rummaged through her bag. When she left again, still unaware of what Jack now knew, he sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush him. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was the realization that everything he had built with Claire, everything he had trusted, was crumbling beneath him. But Jack didn't let himself spiral. When he lifted his head, his expression had shifted. His eyes were no longer clouded with pain. They were sharp, resolute. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about protecting himself, about reclaiming his dignity. Jack picked up his phone and called Victor. I need you, he said, his voice steady and firm. I've got a plan, and you're going to want in on this. By 8 p.m., Jack sat in the room, waiting. Claire had left 20 minutes earlier with the same excuse about needing space to think. Jack knew exactly where she was and who she was meeting. With his phone in hand, he opened the copied messages between Claire and Ethan, saved in a secure app that Victor had helped him set up. Each line still stung, but Jack let it fuel his determination instead of his pain. Tonight wasn't about wallowing. Tonight was about taking back control. Victor, his trusted ally, had already stationed himself in a hotel room across from the bar where Claire and Ethan met. From there, he had a clear view and was capturing everything on camera. Earlier, Victor had also helped Jack uncover incriminating documents about Ethan, evidence of fraudulent deals and underhanded business tactics. Victor wasn't just a tech wizard. He was the push Jack needed to carry this plan through to the end. Cameras rolling, Victor said through Jack's Bluetooth earpiece. They just ordered drinks, and by the way, Claire doesn't look like someone deep in thought about her marriage. Jack smirked, adjusting the collar of his shirt as he left the room. He didn't enter the bar directly, but chose a discreet spot outside where he could see through the glass windows. There they were, Claire and Ethan, sitting close enough to touch. Claire was laughing, her red dress shimmering under the dim lights. Ethan sat across from her, a smug smile plastered on his face as he leaned in, his hand resting dangerously close to hers. Jack's blood boiled, but he kept his composure. Tonight wasn't about creating a scene. Tonight was about exposing the truth. An hour later, Claire and Ethan got up and left the bar. Jack followed at a safe distance, Victor feeding him updates through the earpiece. Got everything on tape. We're good to go, Victor confirmed. Jack felt a sense of grim satisfaction as he tailed them. He checked his watch. It was time to make his move. Ethan led Claire to a private conference room in the hotel, where he was hosting a small gathering for business associates. Jack knew this was the perfect stage to reveal everything. With a USB drive containing all the damning messages and documents Victor had uncovered, Jack walked toward the room with purpose. Inside, the atmosphere was buzzing. Ethan stood in the center of the room, charming his guest with anecdotes and business pitches. Claire was by his side, smiling and nodding, her hand lightly resting on his arm. Jack paused at the entrance, taking it all in. Then he stepped forward. "Sorry to interrupt," Jack said, his voice calm but loud enough to silence the room. All eyes turned to him, including Claire's, which widened in shock. Ethan's expression shifted from annoyance to smugness, as if he didn't see Jack as a threat. Jack held up the USB drive, a small smile playing on his lips. "I brought something special for the evening. I think everyone here will find it enlightening." Before Ethan could stop him, Jack plugged the drive into the room's projector. The screen behind them flickered to life, displaying the first incriminating text messages between Claire and Ethan. The room fell silent as the words appeared on the screen, each one more damning than the last. Then came the video footage Victor had recorded. Claire and Ethan at the bar, their flirtations undeniable. Gasps filled the room, but Jack wasn't done. The next slides were documents exposing Ethan's fraudulent business dealings, the evidence irrefutable. Ethan's confident facade crumbled as the room erupted in whispers and outrage. Claire stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, but Jack didn't look at her. His focus was on Ethan. "You thought you could fool everyone, didn't you?" Jack said, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Well, consider yourself exposed." As Jack walked out of the room, the sound of chaos followed him. Ethan shouting in vain, Claire sobbing quietly. But Jack didn't stop or look back. With each step, he felt lighter, as if the weight of betrayal had finally lifted. Tonight wasn't just a victory over Ethan or Claire. Tonight, Jack had reclaimed himself. When Jack appeared in the room, no one paid him any attention. Claire stood next to Ethan, her hand gently resting on his arm. Ethan wore a confident smile as he charmed a group of guests, persuading them to sign the contract spread out before him. Jack waited patiently, letting the moment build until every pair of eyes in the room inevitably turned to him. "Sorry to interrupt," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "But I think I have a special gift for tonight's gathering." All heads turned toward Jack. Claire froze in place, her body stiffening as her wide, panicked eyes locked onto him. Ethan, however, smirked smugly, his arrogance practically oozing from him as if Jack posed no threat. But Jack knew better. Tonight, the tables were his to turn. Without hesitation, Jack held up a USB drive and walked toward the projector at the front of the room. "This," he said, plugging the drive in, "is a short video I think everyone here, especially Ethan's business partners, would find very interesting." Before Ethan could move to stop him, the screen behind them lit up. The first image was a video clip of Claire and Ethan in a dimly lit bar, leaning into each other as their lips met in a kiss. The silence in the room was deafening as Jack clicked to the next slide, screenshots of their text messages projected in stark black and white. Messages like, "I miss you," and "I'll see you after Jack falls asleep," glowed on the screen, exposing every deceitful word for the room to see. Gasps rippled through the crowd and whispers of disbelief filled the air. But Jack wasn't finished. With a measured calmness, he moved to the next set of slides, evidence of Ethan's shady business dealings. Fake contracts, fraudulent transfers, and damning documentation unfolded one after another on the screen. The room erupted into chaos as some of Ethan's partners stood abruptly, pulling out their phones to make calls. Ethan's face turned beet red as he tried to regain control. "Who the hell do you think you are doing this?" he shouted, stepping toward Jack in a fury. Jack didn't flinch. His calm demeanor made Ethan's rage seem all the more pitiful. "I'm the man you and Claire thought you could fool, but you were wrong. I didn't just uncover your affair. I uncovered the truth about who you are, Ethan, and now, so has everyone else in this room." Claire stood frozen in place, her face pale as tears streamed silently down her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't move. Jack didn't spare her another glance. She had chosen this path, and now she had to face its consequences. As Jack walked out of the room, He felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. Whatever happened next didn't matter. He had done what he needed to do. Behind him, the sound of chaos echoed. Ethan's desperate attempts to explain himself, the whispers of guests who now saw him for what he truly was, and the faint sound of Claire's footsteps trailing behind Jack. But Jack didn't look back. Each step he took away from that room felt like shedding another layer of pain he had carried for far too long. Tonight, he had won. But the true victory wasn't exposing the betrayal. It was reclaiming himself. Outside the hotel, the cool night air filled Jack's lungs. The muffled noise of the party behind him lingered, but he felt no need to turn around. Claire was probably still in there, grappling with the fallout, and Ethan was undoubtedly trying to salvage his crumbling reputation. But none of that mattered anymore. Jack had done what needed to be done. The streets were quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights stretching out before him. Jack walked slowly, each step feeling lighter than the last. In his mind, fragments of the past played like an old film reel. Claire in their early days, smiling, full of life, and brimming with ambition. The nights they spent planning a future, imagining a home filled with the laughter of children. But those dreams were no longer meant for them. And Jack had come to terms with that. A week later, Jack received a letter from Claire. It was the first time she had reached out since the night at the hotel. The letter was brief, but heavy with emotion. Claire thanked him for allowing her to attend their daughter's celebration, and admitted that everything that happened was her fault. She didn't beg for forgiveness or ask for another chance. Instead, she wrote that she would spend the rest of her life trying to atone for what she had done, and hoped that one day Jack would find the happiness she couldn't give him. Jack read the letter, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of his desk. He didn't reply, not out of indifference, but because he knew it wasn't necessary. Their story had ended and nothing could change that. Time passed, and Jack began rebuilding his life. He poured himself into his work, tackling projects he had always put off. He discovered that life wasn't about clinging to what was lost, but about embracing what lay ahead. On quiet evenings, Jack would sit in his small studio, surrounded by sketches and blueprints, finding joy in creating something beautiful again. One evening, while sitting in a cafe near his home, sipping a coffee and reading a book, Jack noticed a woman walk in. Her soft brown curls framed her face, and her bright eyes lit up as she scanned the room. When their eyes met, she smiled, a gentle, unforced smile that felt warm and genuine. Jack returned the smile, subtle but welcoming. She chose a seat near him, and before long, they struck up a conversation. Her name was Emma, an art teacher who had recently moved to town in search of inspiration. There was something disarming about her, a lightness that put Jack at ease, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. They talked late into the evening, moving from casual topics like the weather to deeper musings about life and creativity. Emma knew nothing about Jack's past, and he found solace in not having to share it. He didn't want to dwell on what had been. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to focus on what could be. One quiet night, while organizing his sketches, Jack came across Claire's letter in the drawer. He picked it up and read it once more, but this time, it felt different. There was no anger, no sadness, only a quiet peace. Jack smiled faintly, folded the letter neatly, and placed it into a small keepsake box. It wasn't a lingering attachment, it was a final farewell. Months later, Jack stood on the stage at a design conference, the bright lights illuminating his face. Looking out at the audience filled with admiring faces, he felt a deep sense of confidence and freedom. This wasn't the glow of revenge. It was the light of liberation. As he met the smiles of those in the crowd, Jack knew he had moved past it all. The story of his past was now just a closed chapter in the book of his life.